Exposing the hidden truths of the Nation of Islam. Ready to uncover the facts? Founded in 1930, the Nation of Islam blends black nationalism with unique religious tenets. They teach that black people are divine and that the white race, created by a scientist named Yaqub, is inherently violent. This movement has seen high-profile leaders like Malcolm X and Louis Farrakhan and has faced criticism for its beliefs. Want to learn more? Stay curious. The Nation of Islam, is a religious organization founded in the United States by Wallace Fard Muhammad in 1930. A centralized and hierarchical organization, the NOI is committed to black nationalism and focuses its attention on the African diaspora, especially on African Americans. While describing itself as Islamic and using Islamic terminology, its religious tenets differ substantially from Orthodox Islamic traditions. Scholars of religion characterize it as a new religious movement. The nation teaches that there has been a succession of mortal gods, each a black man named Allah, of whom Fard Muhammad is the most recent. It claims that the first Allah created the earliest humans, the Arabic-speaking dark-skinned tribe of Shabazz, whose members possessed inner divinity and from whom all people of color descend. It maintains that a scientist named Yaqub then created the white race. The whites lacked inner divinity and were intrinsically violent. They overthrew the tribe of Shabazz and achieved global dominance. Setting itself against the white-dominated society of the United States, the NOE campaigns for the creation of an independent African-American nation-state and calls for African Americans to be economically self-sufficient and separatist. A millenarian tradition, it maintains that Fard Muhammad will soon return aboard a spaceship, the Mother Plane, or Mothership, to wipe out the white race and establish a utopia. Members worship in buildings called mosques or temples. Practitioners are expected to live disciplined lives, adhering to strict dress codes, specific dietary requirements, and patriarchal gender roles. Wallace Fard Muhammad established the Nation of Islam in Detroit. He drew on various sources including Noble Drew Ali's Moorish Science Temple of America, black nationalist trends like Garveyism, and black-oriented forms of Freemasonry. After Fard Muhammad disappeared in 1934, the leadership of the NOI was assumed by Elijah Muhammad. He expanded the NOI's teachings and declared Fard Muhammad to be the latest Allah. Attracting growing attention in the late 1950s and 1960s, the NOI's influence expanded through high-profile members such as the black nationalist activist Malcolm X and the boxer Muhammad Ali. Deeming it a threat to domestic security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation worked to undermine the group. Following Elijah Muhammad's death in 1975, his son Warith Deen Muhammad took over the organization, moving it towards Sunni Islam and renaming it the World Community of Islam in the West. Members seeking to retain Elijah Muhammad's teachings re-established the Nation of Islam under Louis Farrakhan's leadership in 1977. Farrakhan has continued to develop the NOI's beliefs, for instance, by drawing connections with Dianetics and expanding its economic and agricultural operations. Based in the United States, the Nation of Islam has also established a presence abroad, with membership open only to people of color. In 2007, it was estimated to have 50,000 members. The nation has proven to be particularly successful at converting prisoners. The Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League have characterized it as a black supremacist hate group that promotes racism towards white people, anti-Semitism, and anti-LGBT rhetoric. Muslim critics accuse it of promoting teachings that are not authentically Islamic. The Nation of Islam, NOE, is a new religious movement, a black nationalist religion, and an African American religion. As well as being characterized as an ethno-religious movement, it has been labeled a social movement. Scholars of religion have highlighted commonalities between the NOE and UFO religions, with extraterrestrial spaceships featuring in the group's ideas about the end of the world. The scholar of religion Stephen C. Finley also suggested that it could be seen as a form of esotericism. The name Nation of Islam has represented two distinct organizations. The first group was established by Wallace Fard Muhammad in the 1930s and existed until 1975, after which the second organization was created by Louis Farrakhan in the late 1970s. Farrakhan's Second Nation has some differences from its predecessor, reflecting how the nation's teachings have shifted over its history. More broadly, the sociologist of religion Susan J. Palmer characterized the nation as forming part of a black cultic milieu in which it coexists alongside various black-oriented new religions, including Rastafari, the Black Hebrew Israelites, and the Nuwaubian Nation. The Nation of Islam is a highly centralized, hierarchical, and authoritarian movement. Unlike practitioners of Rastafari, members of the nation do not exhibit considerable variation in their approach to the religion, displaying a high degree of uniformity and conformity. Despite this, not all members have believed all of its teachings implicitly, and there are members who have privately broken its rules on personal behavior and lifestyle. The nation has no specific holy text of its own and is influenced by both Christianity and Islam, while offering profoundly different interpretations of their central scriptures, the Bible and the Quran. Having arisen from within a Christian majority society, the nation denigrates Christianity, presenting it as a tool of white supremacy. For the group, whose members are commonly called Black Muslims, their Islamic identity offers an alternative to mainstream, Christian-dominated American culture. In describing itself as Islamic, the NOI seeks to reclaim what it regards as the historic Muslim identity of the African American people, with the group's second leader, Elijah Muhammad, stating that Islam is the natural religion of the black nation. The nation sees itself as part of the Islamic world, and Islamic elements in its practices include the use of the Arabic language, prayers 5 times a day, and the adoption of a flag based on that of Muslim-majority Turkey. The nation has little in common with mainstream forms of Islam. Mainstream Muslims generally see it as a movement that has selectively adopted some Islamic beliefs and concepts, but is not truly Islamic. The scholars Jason Eric Fishman and Anna Belen Soaj observed that although the nation uses many standard Islamic terms, it gives them profoundly different meanings to those understood by most Muslims. The nation's views differ from the 5 pillars, which are typically seen as central to Islam. Its claims that God takes anthropomorphic form and that there is no afterlife differ fundamentally from Muslim teaching. Unlike most forms of Islam, the NOI does not hold that Muhammad was the final nor the most important messenger of God, instead treating its first 2 leaders, Fard Muhammad and Elijah Muhammad, as being more important. From mainstream Islamic perspectives, its teachings are heretical, with its theology being shirk, blasphemy. Accordingly, some scholars of religion have characterized it as quasi-Islamic, or referred to it as Fardian Islam, pseudo-Islam, or non-traditional Islam. The sociologist of religion, David V. Barrett, noted that the nation's theology is very distinct and extremely detailed. The nation provides conflicting statements about its theology. Although it professes commitment to the monotheistic idea of a single God, its discourse refers to multiple gods, meaning that it can be interpreted as polytheistic. In the NOI's view, each Allah, God, is not an incorporeal spiritual entity, but a flesh and blood person. These Allahs are anthropomorphic, taking the form of black men, which was the shape that the first Allah consciously adopted. In nation teaching, the Allahs are not immortal, instead typically living for around 200 to 300 years. They have varying abilities and degrees of power, with each taking over following the death of their predecessor, after which they rule for a cycle in history. The nation regards its founder, Fard Muhammad, as the latest of these Allahs, or God in person. He is deemed the first to have attained the same powers as that of the earliest Allah, namely, the ability to return the universe to its primordial darkness and then recreate it. The nation teaches that although this founder disappeared in 1934, he had secretly moved to Mecca and would live for another 409 years. Reflecting a belief in the inner divinity of humanity that is common among black-oriented new religions, the nation also promotes the idea that God is man and man is God, that God has a presence inside human individuals. Accordingly, the NOI teaches that the black race, in its natural state, is divine, a nation of gods, with Elijah Muhammad espousing the view that all Muslims are Allahs. According to the NOI, knowledge of self is key for black people to realize their inner divinity. The NOI thus maintains that by following its teachings, its adherents can recognize their inner godliness. Elijah Muhammad, for instance, stated that humans could develop parapsychological powers and that he personally had telepathic abilities. The Nation of Islam's theology is completely divorced from mainstream Islam. The two differ in regard to the fundamental ontological divide between humanity and God, as well as God's nature, which for mainstream Muslims is deemed eternal and non-anthropomorphic. Also conflicting with mainstream Islam is the Noah's claim that there is no afterlife. Elijah Muhammad wrote that, "When you are dead, you are dead." Notions of heaven, the Nation claims, are a lie used by white Christians to keep black people docile. Instead, Elijah Muhammad taught that there is no spiritual realm beyond the material universe. The Nation teaches that in the beginning there was nothing but darkness. Then, 76 trillion years ago, the first Allah willed himself into being, taking 6 million years to form into his desired appearance, that of a black man, in reference to the blackness from which he had emerged. The first Allah then created the sun and the planets, as well as fellow black gods, who lived predominantly on the earth but also on Mars. Of these, the first Allah and 23 others formed a council of ruling imams, 12 greater and 12 lesser. Each of these imams would take a turn being the ruling Allah for one cycle each. The Noai refers to these early individuals as God scientists. They are part of what it calls the original or Asiatic race, a people who were divided into 13 tribes. The Nation labels these people black, describing them as having dark skin as well as smooth, straight hair, closely resembling dark-complexioned Arabians or South Asians rather than sub-Saharan Africans. In portraying humanity as the creation of the first Allah, rather than a product of evolution, the Nation endorses a unique form of creationism and believes dinosaurs to be a hoax created by white scientists. According to Nation teaching, one of the God scientists was a renegade and, 66 trillion years ago, tried to destroy the Earth with explosives. The resulting explosion forced a chunk of the Earth's mass into orbit, where it became the Moon. One of the 13 tribes was trapped on the Moon, where they died due to lack of water. The Nation also maintains that 15,000 years ago, the God scientists wrote down knowledge of the future in a text, the Mother Book, parts of which have passed down in the Torah, Gospels, and Quran. Of the 12 tribes that remained on Earth, the most resilient was the tribe of Shabazz. They settled in Egypt's Nile Valley and the area around Mecca in the Arabian Peninsula. The Nation calls this region East Asia, reflecting its belief that Asia and Africa were once a single continent. It was because they moved into the jungles of East Asia, i.e., Africa, Elijah Muhammad claimed that members of this original Asiatic race developed Afro-textured hair. The Nation teaches that the original race were Muslims by their intrinsic nature, but that many created heretical deviations such as Hinduism. Some of those who broke Islamic rules were exiled to North America, where they became the continent's native population. For the Nation, everyone not of West European genetic origin is a descendant of the original Asiatic race. In contrast to understandings of race held by most Americans, for the Nation, black does not simply mean those of sub-Saharan African genetic descent, but all people of color, including Asians, North Africans, and Native Americans. Even some Eastern Europeans, such as Albanians, are considered descendants of the original Asiatic race. Elijah Muhammad, for instance, referred to black, brown, yellow, and red people as collectively constituting black mankind, which he then juxtaposed against the white race. The Noai promotes a story called The Story of Yaqub, which received its fullest exposition in Elijah Muhammad's 1965 book, Message to the Black Man. In this narrative, Yaqub was a black scientist, a child prodigy. By the age of 18, he had learned everything that Mecca's universities had to teach him. He attracted a following, but caused trouble, leading the Meccan authorities to exile him and his 59,999 followers to Palan, the Mediterranean island of Patmos. On Palan, the NOI claims, Yaqub engaged in a selective breeding program to create the white race. This entailed breeding new children, with those who were too dark killed at birth and their bodies fed to wild animals or incinerated. Over 2 centuries, Yaqub's experiments created a blonde, light-skinned people, the white race. As a group of people distinct from the original Asiatic race, the white race are degenerate, subhuman, and bereft of divinity, being intrinsically prone to lying, violence, and brutality. Elijah Muhammad repeatedly referred to whites as the devil. The nation maintains that most white people are unaware of their true origins, but that such knowledge is held by senior white Freemasons. These ideas have been labeled both racist and racialist. According to the nation's teachings, Yaqub's newly created white race sowed discord among black people and thus were exiled to live in the caves of West Asia, meaning Europe. In this narrative, it was in Europe that the white race engaged in bestiality and degenerated, resulting in the emergence of apes and monkeys. To help the whites develop, the ruling Allah sent prophets to them, the first of whom was Musa, Moses, who taught the whites to cook and wear clothes. According to the nation, Jesus was also a prophet sent to civilize the white race. The group rejects the Christian belief that Jesus was a unique manifestation of God, that he was the Messiah, was the product of a virgin birth, or was crucified and resurrected. In the nation's teachings, the ruling Allah permitted the white race to rule the earth for 6,000 years, a period ending in 1914. It claims that the ruling Allahs allowed this so that black people would discover humanity's inner potential for evil and learn how to defeat it, thus enabling them to realize their inner divine capacity and become gods. The NOI claims that over 6,000 years ago, the whites began to dominate the world, using treacherous tactics that the nation calls tricknology. As part of this, the whites enslaved the tribe of Shabazz, shipping many of them to the Americas through the Atlantic slave trade. The NOI claims that most enslaved blacks forgot their true names, their Arabic language, and their Muslim identity, instead embracing Christianity, which the nation labels white man's religion. The group deems Christianity a tool of white supremacy used to subjugate black people and expresses the belief that the oppressed, African Americans, and the oppressors, European Americans, cannot share the same God. The nation claims that in their enslaved state, black people have lost their morality by engaging in sinful behavior such as fornication and drinking alcohol, something encouraged by the whites. In making this argument, the NOI equates the United States with the city of Babylon as presented in the Bible. The nation thus understands the modern subjugation of African Americans as part of an ancient white conspiracy. The group interprets many of the problems facing African Americans in this light. Farrakhan, for instance, claimed that the white establishment encouraged a black gang culture to provide an excuse for the police killing of black youths, that they flooded black majority areas with drugs, and that they created aids to exterminate black people. The nation is also openly critical of U.S. aggression towards countries with non-white and Muslim majorities, and in keeping with its ethos, has adopted an anti-Zionist position regarding Israel. The NOI is millenarian. Believing that humanity is living in end times, it propounds a distinct eschatology drawing on the Book of Revelation. Central to its view of the apocalypse is a large spaceship known as the Wheel, the Mother Plane, or the Mother Ship, and which members usually refer to using female pronouns. Elijah Muhammad described this as a small human planet, claiming that it is half a mile in diameter. The nation teaches that this vessel is the Merkabah that appears in the Book of Ezekiel 1:4-28. It teaches that Allah and many of his scientists live in a magnificent city on the Mother Plane from which they monitor humanity. Farrakhan has claimed that Elijah Muhammad never died, but is resident aboard this ship. The nation teaches that there are also smaller vessels, baby planes, docked inside the mothership, and that these travel to visit Earth. The nation teaches that a period of deteriorating racial tensions will culminate in the apocalypse. NOI members have repeatedly claimed that this apocalypse is imminent. Farrakhan, for instance, predicted that the Gulf War of 1990 would spark it, while Tanetta Muhammad predicted it would occur in 2001. According to nation teaching, the apocalypse will come when the mother plane appears above the earth and transports the righteous to live aboard it. It will then use the baby planes to bury bombs beneath the Earth's surface, which on detonation will wipe out the old, white-dominated order. The Earth's atmosphere will then burn for 390 years and spend another 610 cooling down. Once the Earth has returned to a habitable state, the ruling Allah will return the righteous to live on the planet in a new black paradise. In his book, The Supreme Wisdom, Elijah Muhammad claimed that after the apocalypse, peace, joy, and happiness will have no end. Those living in this perfect society will eat the finest food and wear clothes of silk interwoven with gold. The Noai has taught that the white ruling elite are aware of this forthcoming apocalypse and that the U.S. exploration of space and the Strategic Defense Initiative are futile attempts to protect themselves against the mother plane. Ideologically, the NOI is black nationalist and has sometimes been perceived as a black power political organization. Scholar of religion Matthias Gardell commented that the idea of black unity is at the very core of the NOI ideology. It seeks to empower black people by giving them a positive self-identity, purging ideas of white superiority and black inferiority from its followers. In the nation's view, black liberation requires a religious dimension. It regards African Americans, or black people more broadly, as the chosen people, espousing a cosmology in which the black race is superior and the white race inferior. The nation is black separatist, rejecting the integration of the black and white races. This racial separatism was at odds with the mainstream civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. The nation was critical of African American activists who promoted racial integration, such as Martin Luther King Jr. and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, regarding them as Uncle Tom Negroes. In contrast to King's calls for nonviolent protest against segregation and racial violence, the nation maintained that self-defense was a moral obligation for African Americans. The NOI called for the creation of a separate sovereign African American nation-state in the southern part of what is currently the United States, with Elijah Muhammad stipulating that the U.S. should financially support this new country for 20 to 25 years. This is presented as compensation for the unpaid labor of their enslaved ancestors. Farrakhan has also suggested that the countries of Africa should set aside land on that continent for the African diaspora, characterizing this as a reparation for the complicity of West African states in the Atlantic slave trade. Gardell suggested that any nation-state formed under the nation's leadership would be theocratic, authoritarian, and totalitarian. Unlike the Garveyites and Rastafari, who strongly emphasize links between the African diaspora and Africa itself, Elijah Muhammad and the NOI instead focused their attention on the African diaspora in the Americas, rejecting a specifically Pan-African ideology. Elijah Muhammad stated that, whereas the black man in Africa is our brother, our central responsibility is with the black man here in the wilderness of North America. Rather than treating Africa as a homeland, the nation's origin myths present Mecca as the original home of African Americans. Africa itself is often portrayed in nation writings as the least desirable of the original Asiatic lands. The Noah's teachings on gender are conservative and patriarchal. It promotes strict gender roles, maintaining that the security of the black family is ensured when its members adhere to their gendered responsibilities. Emphasis is placed on the family unit, with the nation being critical of the historically matrifocal focus of many African American families, instead stressing the importance of a male family figurehead. Seeking to restore black manhood, the nation expresses great concern regarding the emasculation of black men, attributing this attitude to the failure of black men to prevent the sexual assault of black women by white men over the centuries. It expects men to be providers for their family. Women are expected to act as caretakers of the household and the children, and are cautioned against forming friendships with men. Outsiders often perceive the nation's women as being victims of male oppression and control. The group's leadership is overwhelmingly male, although several women rose to senior positions during the 1990s. In 1998, the nation appointed its first woman minister, Ava Muhammad, as head of Mosque No. 15 in Georgia. Some nation women still play an active role in their communities, sometimes challenging established gender norms in the organization. The NOI strictly enforces heterosexual monogamy among its members and encourages sexual abstinence prior to marriage. Members seeking to court another are expected to inform the captain of their local Fruit of Islam or Muslim Girls Training branch about their intentions. Men found to have beaten their wives are temporarily suspended from nation membership. Divorce is discouraged but not forbidden. Children are expected to study hard, avoid street culture, and respect their elders. Although nation members are allowed to marry non-members, the group stipulates that they should only marry other black people, claiming that sex with white women emasculates black men. Birth control methods are criticized as an attempt by the white establishment to lower the black birth rate, although Farrakhan stated support for abortion in cases of rape, incest, or where the woman's life is endangered. Same-sex relationships are condemned as immoral. Elijah Muhammad complained that schools, jails, and prisons were breeding dens of homosexuals, while Farrakhan banned gay men from his Million Man March, bringing accusations of homophobia. During the 1960s, the Noah's places of worship were called both temples and mosques. As well as serving a religious function, these can also be used as a community center, bank, school, and childcare facility. The figure leading a temple is called the captain and will be a member of the Fruit of Islam subgroup. Those attending meetings will sometimes be searched by members of the Fruit of Islam or the Muslim Girls Training Group, who look for weapons and for objects like cosmetics and cigarettes which are disapproved of. After this, attendees are seen to their seats, usually rows of benches. The sexes are segregated during worship, women on the right and men on the left. The tone of nation services is somber and quiet. Services typically begin with the statement, "Assalamu alaikum," peace be upon you, with the congregation responding, "Wa alaikum assalam," and also upon you. Meetings at the mosque are both opened and closed with prayers, and the nation's national anthem may be played. A lecture is provided by a minister, who may also read verses from either the Bible or Quran. In the late 1950s, Elijah Muhammad published a prayer manual outlining how his followers should pray 5 times a day. This involved an ablution beforehand, typically involving washing the hands, face, and ears, symbolically associating physical cleanliness with the purification of the body more broadly. Women are expected to cover their heads while praying. Elijah Muhammad stipulated that these prayers should be in English, although commented that in future he would explain how to do so in Arabic. In later articles, he explained that his followers should face towards Mecca as they pray, symbolizing their journey toward the restoration of black greatness. The most important date in the nation's year is February 26th, Savior's Day, which is believed to be the birthday of Fard Muhammad. This is the date on which the organization holds its annual national convention. Under Farrakhan, the nation has also held a second Savior's Day each year, on October 7th, to mark the birth of Elijah Muhammad. In addition to marking festivals, NOI members are encouraged to make the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. Elijah Muhammad himself did so 3 times. The nation requests that, as a declaration of mental emancipation, new members change any names inherited from slave owners who owned their ancestors. This is not considered necessary if the new member has a name that is already African in origin. In the NOI's early years, Wallace Fard Muhammad bestowed new names on followers for a $10 fee. During the mid-20th century, the nation began encouraging the use of X as a surname, symbolizing what they regarded as the African American's identity as an ex-slave, and also as a marker for their lost ancestral name. As this results in many individuals having the same name, numbers are added before the X to differentiate members, i.e., Charles 2X, Charles 3X. The NOI encourages its followers to live highly disciplined and structured lifestyles. This conservative and ascetic approach has led to followers being called Black Puritans. Nation members are encouraged to obey the law, to seek gainful employment, to always be punctual, to avoid buying on credit, and to never gamble. Male members typically cut their hair short, sometimes shaving the head entirely, and do not usually wear beards. This signifies their willingness to abide to the nation's strict rules and reflect their renunciation of much personal choice. They are expected to wear suits with either ties or bow ties. Those who are part of the Fruit of Islam wear military-style uniforms, sometimes accompanied by a fez. Women are commanded to dress modestly. They are not permitted to wear trousers, are expected to wear long sleeves, and are encouraged to cover their heads. Cosmetics and the chemical or heat-based straightening of hair is also discouraged. The NOI teaches that practitioners should keep fit and maintain a healthy diet, as part of which it espouses strict dietary rules. Vegetarianism is encouraged among members, although not obligatory, with Elijah Muhammad writing that meat was never intended for man to eat. In How to Eat to Live, Elijah Muhammad urged his followers to subsist primarily on fruit, vegetables, and certain grains, and to choose lamb if they must eat meat. Discouraged foods include dried fruits, white flour, additives, and fast food. Although its own produce is not wholly organic, the nation is supportive of organic food and the avoidance of genetically modified crops, insecticides, and pesticides. The NOI also encourages followers to avoid foods associated with the slave culture of the U.S., such as cornbread, catfish, and collard greens, deeming this cuisine to be undignified. Concerned about obesity and diabetes among African Americans, Elijah Muhammad urged his followers to restrict their caloric intake, ideally by eating only one meal a day. He claimed that this would extend the human lifespan, and that those who ate only once every 24 hours would live for 150 years, and that those who ate once every 7 days would live for 1,050 years. Members are also encouraged to conduct regular 3-day fasts and to fast during the daylight for the entirety of December. The NOI also prohibits the use of alcohol, tobacco, and other recreational drugs and has recommended the avoidance of vaccines for children. Espousing economic nationalism, the nation follows the ideas of earlier thinkers like Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey in emphasizing the construction of African American infrastructure as a means of community empowerment. The nation has created many companies, including the Salam restaurant chain, the Shabazz bakeries, the Fashan Islamic clothing range, the Clean and Fresh skin and hair care products, and Abundant Life clinics. It also owns a mall in Chicago and clothing stores and food markets. These businesses provide income for the NOI and help tackle African American unemployment. Since the 1980s, the nation has also sought government contracts, and in 1988, it established the Security Agency Incorporated to provide FOI patrols for clients. In 1985, it launched its POWER, People Organized and Working for Economic Rebirth project, designed to redirect Black purchasing power toward Black-owned businesses. It also seeks the collective economic advancement of African Americans through individual achievement. Various women members created their own businesses, sometimes run from the home. Some of its African American anti-capitalist critics have derided the nation's economic approach as Black capitalism. Farrakhan has responded that while socialism appeals to him, capitalism is the only feasible road to economic empowerment for African Americans. The nation prioritizes land ownership to increase food production and autonomy for African Americans. A commonly used slogan among the NOI is that the farm is the engine of our national life. It established a farm in White Cloud, Michigan in 1947, and by the early 1970s owned 20,000 acres of farmland in Michigan, Alabama, and Georgia. In 1994, Farrakhan's nation purchased 1,556 acres of rural South Georgia near Brownwood, naming it Muhammad Farms. Much of the produce grown here is distributed to NOI mosques around the country. NOI members also own urban gardens in various U.S. cities. In 1991, the nation launched its 3-year economic savings plan, asking followers to send them $10 a month over the 3 years, money that would collectively allow the group to buy more farmland. For the nation, acquiring land and growing food is regarded as a means of building self-determination for African Americans. It hopes to establish a system of Black-owned farms through which to feed 40 million Black people, with the stated aim of providing at least one healthy meal a day for every African American. The NOI is highly critical of the U.S. school system, believing that by being Eurocentric in its focus and concealing the achievement of non-white societies, it perpetuates white supremacy. To this end, the nation has established its own educational system. Across the U.S., it has established Muhammad Universities of Islam. Most of these are elementary schools, although a few also offer secondary education. These emphasize science, mathematics, Black history, Arabic, and NOI doctrine. Farrakhan has said that they need to provide Black children with an education to make them gods. In these schools, boys and girls are taught separately. Pupils are only given 2 weeks of vacation each year. Combating the idea that academic achievement entails acting white, the nation has sought to associate hard work in school with pride in being Black. as well as African American pupils. Some of these schools have also accepted students from Latino, Asian, and Pacific Island communities. The nation has a long-standing record of involvement in civic, economic, and political activities. In some economically deprived areas, it has played a role in providing services that public institutions have not. In some areas with high African American populations, the NOI has, for instance, engaged in door-to-door campaigns to raise awareness about local pollution, or used the Fruit of Islam to patrol neighborhoods as a community watchdog, especially to stop drug dealing. The nation has also urged African Americans not to rely on state welfare payments, arguing that this undermines the community's ability to be self-sufficient. The scholar Edward E. Curtis IV stated that the nation is both highly religious and political at the same time, while Gardell noted that it formulated emphatic political demands. However, the NOI has urged its members to avoid mainstream electoral politics. Throughout most of his leadership, Elijah Muhammad instructed his followers not to vote. Later, Farrakhan backed Jesse Jackson's 1984 campaign to become the Democratic Party's presidential candidate, and in 1990, 3 NOI candidates stood for election in the U.S. Although many outsiders have presumed the NOI to be a revolutionary movement, it has not sought to foment political revolution or violent social change, instead focusing its emphasis on shifting the consciousness of its members, encouraging them to focus on personal moral improvement, family building, and economic activity. Islam had a presence in North America prior to the formation of the United States. African Muslims were among the Spanish expeditions that explored the continent during the early modern period, and were also among the many enslaved people transported there via the Atlantic slave trade of the 16th to 19th centuries. It is estimated that, at the time of the American Revolution in the 1760s-80s, approximately 15% of enslaved Africans and African Americans in the new United States were Muslim. Although Islam probably died out among the African American community over subsequent generations, the notion that Islam was a religion historically associated with African Americans influenced the emergence of groups like the NOI in the early 20th century. The nation formed in the 1930s, when large numbers of African Americans were migrating from southern states to northern cities, and most of its early members were southern migrants who had settled in Detroit. The early NOI's outlook was informed by various sources, including older forms of Black nationalism, Garveyism, the Moorish Science Temple of America, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and Black Freemasonry. In particular, the scholar Don Gibson characterized the nation as having been born out of a fusion between the ideas of Garveyism and the Moorish Science Temple. A major influence on the NOI's ideas was the Jamaican Black nationalist Marcus Garvey, who lived in the U.S. from 1916 to 1927 and who formed the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, UNIA. Garvey's economic nationalism and calls for Black self-sufficiency and enterprise were a particular influence on the nation, with the scholar Zoe Coley commenting that UNIA provided the cultural bedrock for the NOI. The Moorish Science Temple, an organization also promoting an idiosyncratic religion that described its teachings as Islam, would also be a key influence on the nation. This had been established by the North Carolina-born African-American noble Drew Ali in Newark, New Jersey, in 1913. Drew Ali claimed that he was the reincarnation of both Jesus and Muhammad, and maintained that African Americans should refer to themselves as Moorish Americans, reflecting what he believed were their connections to the Islamic Moors of North Africa. The Nation of Islam was founded by Wallace Fard Muhammad, who appeared in Detroit in July 1930 when he began preaching his ideas among the city's African Americans. Fard Muhammad claimed that he was an Arab from Mecca who had come to the United States on a mission to the African American people, whom he called the Nation of Islam, to restore them to their original faith. The nation has since taught that Fard Muhammad was Allah himself. They have claimed that he was born in Mecca on February 26, 1877, the son of a black father and white mother, a woman from the Caucasus Mountains named Baby G. Being half white, the NOI maintain, was necessary for allowing him to move freely in white society. Outside of the nation, various theories have been proposed as to Fard Muhammad's true identity. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, later noted that Fard Muhammad's fingerprints matched those of Wally D. Ford, a white man who had a record of arrests and had served a 3-year sentence in San Quentin prison for drug charges. Ford had been released in May 1929, a year before the appearance of Fard Muhammad. The NOI reject the identification of Fard Muhammad as Ford, claiming that the FBI forged the fingerprint evidence. There have also been suggestions made that, on his release from prison, Fard had joined the Moorish Science Temple of America and subsequently forged his nation as a breakaway faction. Fard Muhammad's following grew rapidly. He held meetings 3 days a week which attracted 7,000 to 8,000 people, some of them former members of the Moorish Science Temple. Fard Muhammad wrote 2 manuals, The Secret Ritual of the Nation of Islam and The Teaching for the Lost Found Nation of Islam in a Mathematical Way. He also urged his followers to listen to the radio sermons of the Watchtower Society and Baptist fundamentalists. He established a bureaucratic administration within the nation, its own system of schools, and the Fruit of Islam (FOI) paramilitary wing for men and the Muslim Girls Training School for women. In 1975, Elijah Muhammad died and was succeeded by his son, Wallace Muhammad. Wallace Muhammad had had a strained relationship with his father and his father's teachings. While imprisoned in the early 1960s, he had moved closer to Sunni Islam and had left the nation on several occasions during the 1960s and 1970s, only rejoining in 1974. As leader, Wallace Muhammad launched what he called a second resurrection in the movement. Wallace Muhammad increasingly aligned the group with Sunni Islam, rejecting many of the nation's idiosyncratic teachings, including its claim that Fard Muhammad was God, that Elijah Muhammad had been a prophet, and its belief in the myth of Yaqub and the Mother Plain. He retained the nation's themes of black pride, healthy diets, sexual modesty, and economic self-determination. Temples were renamed mosques, while ministers were renamed imams. The FOI was disbanded, with Wallace calling it a hooligan outfit. Black nationalism was abandoned, and the ban on white people joining the nation was lifted. In November 1976, the nation was renamed the World Community of Al-Islam in the West, and in April 1978, it became the American Muslim Mission. Wallace Muhammad also renamed himself, first to Warith Deen, and then to Warithuddin Muhammad. Wallace Muhammad claimed that these changes were in accordance with his father's intentions. He claimed to be in contact with Fard Muhammad, and that the founder had established the NOI's idiosyncratic beliefs as a means of gradually introducing Islamic teachings to African Americans, with the ultimate intention of bringing them to Sunni Islam. Wallace Muhammad claimed that the nation's old belief that the white man was the devil referred to mental whiteness, a state that is rebelling against Allah rather than light-skinned people themselves. Most mosques remained with Wallace Muhammad during these reforms, but some mosques rejected them, seeking to return to the group's original teachings. Small splinter groups emerged in Detroit, Atlanta, and Baltimore. In 1985, Wallace Muhammad disbanded the organization, telling his followers to affiliate instead with their local mosques. The leading figure in rejecting Wallace Muhammad's reforms was Louis Farrakhan, who, with other disaffected members, began to rebuild the Nation of Islam in 1977. Born in the Bronx to Caribbean migrants, Farrakhan had been a nightclub singer prior to joining the original nation in 1955. In 1964, he had become minister of the NOI's Harlem Temple and in 1967, a national representative of Elijah Muhammad. Under Wallace Muhammad's leadership, Farrakhan was relocated to Chicago, widely seen as a demotion. Farrakhan presented himself as Elijah Muhammad's true successor. His followers described Wallace Muhammad's leadership as the fall. Farrakhan's NOI spent the first several years focusing on rebuilding. The Fruit of Islam was re-established. In 1979, Farrakhan established a newspaper, The Final Call, which by 1994 had a circulation of 500,000. In 1981, Farrakhan's nation held its first convention, and its membership began to increase rapidly in the mid-1980s. It was able to buy much of the property owned by its predecessor, including the Chicago Palace and the Stony Island Mosque. Farrakhan claimed that in 1985, at Tepoztlán in Mexico, he was teleported aboard the mother plane and there was given advice on the future of the nation. Masonic elements and numerology came to play an important part in Farrakhan's speeches. Farrakhan's nation expanded its international network, including building links in Africa. Particularly strong links were built between Farrakhan and Ghanaian President Jerry Rawlings. Under Farrakhan, the NOI adopted more elements of mainstream Islamic practice, although not to the extent of Wallace Muhammad. Although Farrakhan was critical of the heavy use of themes such as sex, violence, and drugs in rap and hip-hop music during the 1980s and 1990s, artists influenced by the nation who were active in these genres played a role in spreading the nation's message. Farrakhan had grown concerned by the growth of gang violence, especially among African American youths, and in 1989 launched his Stop the Killing campaign to combat it. He played a key role in getting two of the country's largest gangs, the Bloods and the Crips, to sign a ceasefire in May 1992. Later in the 1990s, Farrakhan's NOI opened its first mosques in Britain. The NOI says that its finances come primarily from donations and its businesses. At the start of the 1960s, it was reported that members were expected to donate a set part of their earnings to the group each year. As of 1952, this reportedly constituted a third of a member's annual income. In 1976, Wallace Muhammad estimated the nation's net worth to be $46 million, although revealed it had a severe cash flow problem, owed millions in back taxes to the Internal Revenue Service, and was making a loss with its agricultural operations. Although the nation does not disclose the extent of its financial resources, in the 1990s its assets were estimated to total $80,000. From its early days, the nation used print media to promote its ideas, including the magazines Muhammad Speaks, 1961-75, and The Final Call. Muhammad Speaks included contributions not only from nation members, but also from leftist and progressive writers in the African American community. Members were encouraged to sell these magazines on street corners or sometimes door-to-door in African American majority areas. These sellers were given sales quotas to fulfill and were sometimes punished if they failed to meet them. The nation's first magazine aimed at women, Righteous Living, appeared in the early 1990s. As well as running shows on radio stations and distributing videos, the nation has also established websites and a presence across many social media outlets. In the 1930s and 1940s, the nation had links with Satokata Takahashi, a Japanese man promoting pro-Japanese sentiment among African American groups. Takahashi lived with an officer of the nation for a time and also married a former member. Elijah Muhammad declared that Takahashi was teaching African Americans that the Japanese were brothers and friends of the American Negroes. During the Second World War, in which the U.S. fought against Japan, many nation members expressed pro-Japanese sentiment and refused the draft, stating that they would not fight people they regarded as fellow members of the original Asiatic race.